Hey guys, my name is Emma and today I'm going to be revealing the books that were on the mystery TBR that my dad sent me at the beginning of November. So very quickly, new filming setup, tell me what you think. I have moved a load of books around and got a new bookcase, so let me know in the comments down below whether you like this one more than my previous one. But we're going to jump straight in. So if you've no idea what I'm on about, I'll link the video down below, but my dad decided to give me 4 books to read in the month of November, but we decided to do things a little bit differently, where he made them be mystery books by completing any evidence of the cover, title or author from the book, so I didn't know what I was reading whilst I was reading it. So what I mean by that is they looked a little something like this. As you can see, it's wrapped in brown paper. We put letters on the front so I had some idea of what the books actually were and could refer back to them from time to time, but the idea is that I had no idea what I was reading whilst I was reading it. And it was a little bit of an exploration about how much information we take from the title and cover and author of the book, and you know, knowing things like the genre of it before we go in, how does that colour our reading expectations. And it was just a little bit of fun that Dad and I were having. So I've now finished all 4 books and I have the wrap up and big reveal for you. So we're going to go in the order that I read them, which is not A to D. I read them kind of all over the place. So we're going to start with book C. I started with book C. And the first thing I'm going to do is reveal what the book was. So with all of these books, apart from one, I did actually work out what it was from information in the book. And this is a book called My Childhood by Maxim Gorky, which was revealed in a footnote which referenced Gorky because it is autobiographical and it referenced something about Gorky's life, and then from that I managed to piece together who it was. So I'll reveal the cover now for you. We have here Gorky, My Childhood, book C. So My Childhood, as the title suggests, is a piece of autobiographical writing that looks at Gorky's childhood growing up in Russia in its kind of the 1910, 1920 kind of time period. Maybe even earlier than that, to be honest. It appeared in 1913, which means that he must have been much younger, so we're probably looking at the very end of the 19th century. Gorky had a very interesting life. He came from a very peasant background. There's all sorts of interactions with his family. It mainly covers his relationship with his grandmother, who he was very close to. I am not the biggest fan of biography or autobiography. I tend to find them quite frustrating and quite dull because they do tend to track a lot of the minutiae of the day-to-day life, which frankly, often if I'm reading a biography or an autobiography, I'm reading it because that person has done 1 or 2 interesting things and I want to know more details about those 1 or 2 interesting things, not your entire back catalogue. Having said that, I did really enjoy this book and found it very interesting because it was a lovely look at a very different lifestyle to what I know in modern day. You know, we're not talking about any of the technology that was available. It was quite a religious household, different cultural norms, like how you reprimand children and what is expected, and it was very interesting. What was also more interesting about this book was until about halfway through I didn't know that it was an autobiographical piece, and it was fascinating seeing how much my enjoyment of it heightened once I realised that it was actually a piece of non-fiction. When approaching this from viewing it as fiction, there were some narrative decisions that didn't really make much sense, which then when you find out that that's actually because that's what happened in the author's life, they make far more sense. So one of his relatives, who he gets on very well with and who is a very interesting character, dies crazy early on, and when that you think of it in terms of fiction, that seems like a really weird narrative decision from the point of the author, because you just axed off a character that I care about and I want to know what happens to him. So I was there kind of feeling a bit frustrated with the writing because it didn't feel like it was going very far, the plot wasn't particularly progressing, I was really struggling with the narrative style. And then once I realised that it was autobiographical, all of that could totally chill, because actually we don't get control over our narrative arcs in life, especially things like when people enter or leave our lives. And so a character's death, which is actually a relative's death, is something which is very interesting because you don't get control over that. So it really highlighted the differences for me between autobiography and narrative fiction, especially when the two mirror each other so closely and like stylistically. So it was very interesting to read this. I would recommend it, especially if you are interested in Russia or Russian history. I thought it was very cool. Then I took on book B. This is Raymond Chandler's The Big Sleep. I knew immediately going into it that it was definitely Raymond Chandler because for those of you, he writes a series of books which are based around a PI or private investigator by the name of Philip Marlowe. And as soon as the name Philip Marlowe came up, I immediately knew who we were on about because I knew the character. It would be like trying to read a Sherlock book and not twig that it was Arthur Conan Doyle. Like, you can't do it. I didn't actually realise it was a big sleep until the very end, because the final pages do, like, one of the final lines is about somebody taking the big sleep, so that did put 2 and 2 together. I loved this. I hadn't read any Raymond Chandler up until this point. I think it's just fantastic. It is your classic crime thriller whodunit. There's a lot of lying and backstabbing and having to plot and scheme, and the PI is, you know, getting mixed up in all sorts of the underbelly of society, and it is just really wonderful. And it's of that kind of time period where people are referring to, like, you know, that everybody's like a doll or a dame, and like the mob are far bigger a deal than they are these days, and it was just wicked. Since reading this, I've actually gone out and bought like 3 more Raymond Chandlers for about £1.50 each, and I cannot wait to get to them. Super excited, and was definitely the most enjoyable book of the 4. Although all of them were interesting reads, this one by far was the one that I enjoyed the process the most. So let's show you the cover, shall we? I feel like a surgeon doing this. Dad's done a very good job of not damaging these by wrapping them. I'm very impressed with him. Voila! Big reveal, dramatic. Then I read book D. Now again, book D was one that I guessed fairly early on by knowing the characters' names, and this one was All Quiet on the Western Front. It's a story in the trenches in the First World War, following a specific character who is Paul Bormer or Brumer. I can't quite remember off the top of my head now. I recognise his name as well as a few of the other ones who are of the men who are in the trenches with him. It's intense. It's based on, I'm pretty sure, the experiences of the author, and it was a wonderful read, but a very emotional read. You know, All Quiet on the Western Front, it's been made into numerous movies, I'm pretty sure. It's like an iconic war story. It's not my favourite representation of war. I personally prefer ones which have a little bit more levity in them, even if that levity is absurdist and just kind of referencing the war. For example, Catch-22, which I read earlier this year and absolutely adored. This one just felt very intense. Some scenes I did really like was when Paul gets leave and manages to go home for a little bit, and his inability to adjust to being back home and how to deal with conversations with people who just have no idea what is going on up there. There are some really emotional deaths. The ending, oh my god, like that just comes out of nowhere and just kind of hits you. You know, again, it was, I knew anyway, but I would have been able to, that it was All Quiet on the Western Front, but I would have been able to guess because the final few pages do indeed reference the phrase All Quiet on the Western Front. It's a very short book. It's a wonderful book. You should so read it if you haven't already. It's one of these books that I do think everybody should read before they die, because it just epitomizes a really horrific part of history, and a lot of focus tends to be put on the Second World War. A lot of the literature I've read about war has been from the Second World War, so to read stuff from the First World War was very interesting. You know, it was the war to end all wars, and then we were back there only a couple of decades later. So let's get a big bit of the cover reveal. I got a bit choked up there, didn't I? And there you have my copy. Lovely. And my hair kind of matches. Probably quite bad because that's supposed to represent blood. Okay, the final book that I have to talk about is book A. This was the only one that I read from start to finish, not knowing who it was by or what it was or having any inclination. So this follows the story of Leo Resnick, who is a lawyer, Jewish lawyer, very important that he's Jewish, who is dating a woman who works at Manhattan Hospital, and she calls him in to see this dead body that turns up, which has got all of the markings of stigmata and the crown of thorns, and basically has every inclination that it's Jesus Christ. And then, to make matters even more confusing, the body disappears. Like, he turns his back for a minute to answer the phone, he comes back round and the body is just gone. And then this takes you on the most intense and epic sci-fi saga I think I've ever attempted to read. Theological sci-fi saga, I guess, where it turns out that Jesus is actually a time-traveling alien of a different species that is integrated with us in a very like hive mind style, that is locked in a battle with Brax, who is the bad guy of this, and it's kind of a retelling of Jesus's story, but through the lens of this sci-fi epic. So Jesus kind of pops back from literally Christian his life into modern day and then back again, because time is not linear, it's continuous. It's kind of a continuum. Yep, stick with me, it's cool, we can do this. And it's about just what happens and his I guess not conversion, but just the interactions between the two of them, and there's a lot of theology in it. Whilst I thought it was a very interesting read, I wouldn't say I actually enjoyed reading it, because so this was written in the 80s, and I think this was a time before good world building being integrated into plot was really a thing. So you get entire chapters, 30-40 plus pages of just exposition, especially towards the middle and the later bits, where we're really just talking through Jesus and the stories of the Bible and putting them in a sci-fi slant to fit in with this like alien race idea. So whilst I really liked all the characters and I liked the plot and I liked what was happening when things were actually happening, a lot of the book is spent just listening to explanations of Jesus's life, but what actually happened. If you are highly religious, you may not like this. It was fascinating to read. The level of research from the author about the Bible and how to make this all connect was very impressive. And I think if you, whilst you don't need to know much about Bible stories to be able to read this, I think you would probably get more out of it if you were a Bible person. If you were happy to divorce this from your actual faith and not get offended by anything. It was bizarre. So to find out what it is, let's open it. I do actually know, Dad told me, but I've now forgotten the name and the author because it's that obscure. I know when I looked on Goodreads, because I did look this one up after Dad told me who it was, there are only 271 ratings, which, given that this was published in the early to mid 80s, is quite impressive to be that obscure for that long. So, oh yes. So this book is Mission by Patrick Tilley. I would be really interested to find out a little bit more about Patrick Tilley and how much of this is his own soapbox style world philosophy coming through. There are a few bits that get very preachy. Funny that, in a book with Jesus and theology. So yeah, feel free to go for it if any of that sounded appealing. It is proper 80s hardcore sci-fi, and for somebody who, like, I read a semi-decent amount of sci-fi, like I've definitely jumped into high fantasy a lot. I can do big world building, guys. Like I'm on board for like absorbing that level of information, and I found this one difficult. So if you are not a sci-fi aficionado, this might be too much for you. This is not an entry-level sci-fi book, but it was very interesting to read. So there you have it, all 4 books that Dad picked for me for my mystery TBR. Really fun experience, actually. I just wanted to close on some comments about what it was like reading books, not knowing what they were going in, and also not having any kind of cover or title to link it to. One thing that I did find really interesting was just how long it took me to get through all these 4 books. Like, it's now 2nd or 3rd day of December. I had an entire month to do them. 4 books in a month should not be a problem for me, and obviously I was reading other stuff as well, but what I did find that was really interesting was I kept forgetting that I had these books because I didn't have a cover or a title to really connect to. Like, I'm a very visual human being, and without that visual representation of the cover to remind me that I had it and I was reading it, I really struggled to even remember that they were there. And this was even like when I was in the middle of them. Like the Raymond Chandler one took me about a week and a half, which is insane because that's the kind of book that I could totally blitz in a sitting if I remember that I've got it. Another thing that was very interesting was going into these books without knowing even a little bit about the blood beforehand meant it was very difficult to work out exactly what bits of it I needed to pay attention to. So, which sounds terrible because you should really pay attention to all of your book. But I definitely skim read a little bit. I'm a very fast reader. I don't even vaguely claim to say that I get everything from a book first time round. So I found it very difficult at times to get into them because I really didn't know what was the big event, what were we building up to, what was the important thing, who were the important characters at the beginning, and it was something that I found I was reading far slower, and it was very interesting. I've touched on a little bit about the non-fiction fiction divide, and that was something that I hadn't expected. We hadn't ruled out non-fiction, but I hadn't expected Dad to pick a non-fiction, and I actually chatted with him about it afterwards, being like, that really was quite jarring because it was it felt like a bad book before I knew that it was based on real life, and that was something which I found very interesting to just experience. yeah, it's been a fun one, let's put it that way. I've enjoyed the whole process, and I definitely would do it again, so that's on to a winner. So that's pretty much it from me. I am going to do a reaction video to me watching back Dad's commentary on it, because I've not seen that yet, so I'm off to film that now, and you will hopefully see it in a few days time. Have you read any of these? What are your thoughts? Let me know. Like, subscribe, comment, everything like that. Have a wonderful week, and I'll chat to you soon. Bye guys.